It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Verse 16 says, Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works, and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Brother Brandon, it's not about you seeing my good works and giving me the glory. Sometimes we get caught up in that, but the whole purpose, Brother Michael, is for when we do serve God and when we do all these things, it's so people can see those works and they can give God the glory. It's not about us or the accolades or whatever that we can gain out of it, but it's to point everybody to God and to heaven. So optics matter. As I was putting this together, I came across this thought, this idea, and it was simply, try to view yourself through the eyes of the world. I mean, just take a look at yourself. And as I was thinking about that, this question came to my mind. And I began to think about it, and I said, ouch. Man, that's a tough question. And the question, Brother Brandon, was simply this. If you were in the world, would you be persuaded to follow Christ based on what you see in yourself? If we were to put ourselves in the world's shoes and we were to look on our own lives, Brother Tommy, would we be persuaded, Brother Larry, to follow Christ based on how we act, on how we reflect Christ's love within us? I thought about that. I thought, man, that's nobody here is perfect. Let's be honest. Nobody here is perfect. The Bible says we've all sinned and come short. We've all messed up. And I believe there's always times that we could do better, Sister Karen. But as I thought about that, this story came to my mind, and I come across this story last year, and it was really good. I kept it in my iPad to use for later date, and today's that later date. But it's a story of a pastor was teaching about holiness inside and out. And one of the brothers in the Bible study interrupted the pastor, and he asked the question. He said, let me ask you, Pastor. He said, when you go to eat a banana, what do you eat, the inside or the outside? And the pastor said, well, I eat the inside. And so the brother that was in the Bible study responded back, and he said, so God is more concerned about the inside, meaning the heart, rather than he is the outside, which is the appearance. So the pastor immediately responded and asked, well, let me ask you this. When you go to buy a banana, what do you notice first, the inside or the outside? And so the brother replied, the outside. And the pastor responded and said, that's because holiness is inside and outside. And I begin to think about that, Brother Bennett. People will judge us based on our outward appearance. That's just a fact of life, Brother Brandon. They're going to judge us based on how we look, how we act, how we treat people, how we respond to situations on the job, all of these things. And the only way they're going to see something good in us and we're going to be able to point them to Christ is what's on the inside. We choose the banana based on what we see. Are we living a life that would encourage people to buy in to Christ? The old saying goes, you may be the only Bible somebody ever reads. 1 Timothy 4 and verse 12 says, let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers, in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity. Till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. Neglect not the gift that is within thee, which was given thee by prophecy, with the laying on of the hands of the presbytery. Verse 15 says, meditate upon these things, give thyself wholly to them, that thy profiting may appear to all. Take heed unto thyself and unto thy doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this shall both save thyself and them that hear these. In other words, he's saying here that we need to take everything, Brother Stacy, that we've been taught. We need to take everything that we believe, everything that's in the Bible, and we need to dwell on those things, and we need to exercise those things. We need to show love to people in the world. And in doing so, that will be a good report. Are we presenting ourselves in a way that demonstrates God's love and that He lives within us? The old saying says, do as I say, not as I do. I begin to think about that. I've heard it so many times as I was growing up, Brother Taylor, and I found myself, Sister Karen, saying the same things to my kids. Do as I say, not as I do. You know, it's just one of those things that just rolls off the tip of your tongue. Something, no doubtedly, that we'd all have said one time or another to our children. Simply means to follow my advice, but not my example. Or take my advice, even though I'm doing the opposite. Some examples of this would be, in my case, would be seatbelts. I hate seatbelts. But I get in the car, and I sit in the car, and I tell my daughter, Brother Taylor, I say, put your seatbelt on. Make sure your seatbelt's on. So she gets her seatbelt, she buckles it, and then I start driving down the road. Next thing I hear is ding, 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 ding. And the car is telling me I need to put my seatbelt on. My daughter will say, Daddy, put your seatbelt on. And while that's a simple analogy, but that's a do as I say, not as I do. I'm telling her to do something I'm not doing myself. No phones or electronics at the dinner table. I've heard that before. I've said it before. But so many times we find ourselves, Brother Welch, we're sitting there at the dinner table, whether it's at a restaurant or somewhere else, and our phone goes off, and we pick it out of our pocket, and we check the text, or we answer the phone, or whatever. But we're trying to encourage some kind of activity that we're not partaking of ourselves. And as I thought about this, one of the big ones that came to my mind, and this, I mean, you know, we're all human. But gossip is one of the big ones. We teach our children, Brother Brandon, that gossip is wrong, that we shouldn't be talking about other people. But every one of us in this sanctuary today, and under the sound of my voice, has one time or another has partook in gossip. It just happens. We need to be diligent to try not to do it, but we've all been guilty. But I thought about this, and I thought about some of the words that Pastor always says. Is it kind? Is it necessary? And is it true? When it comes to gossip. Even though, Brother Bennett, it may be true, is it really necessary to say it? Or if it is necessary to say it, Brother Brandon, is it kind? So many things in life could fall into one of those categories. But if it really doesn't have to be said, why say it? And in Matthew 12 and 36 it says, But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. I don't know about you, but I've got enough things to worry about than have to worry about things that I said that I shouldn't have said. I've got enough things, Brother Taylor, to worry about rather than thinking about, should I have said that about Brother Stacy, or should I have said that about Brother Tommy? An old preacher, there was a story that a lady in the church, she had went and spread some gossip, and she come to the preacher, and she began to beg the preacher, Brother Brandon. She said, Preacher, I've done something terrible. I need your help. And so the preacher began to ask, well, what can I do for you, sis? And she began to say, well, I've said this about so-and-so, and I thought it was true at first, but I found out that it wasn't true, and I need help. I need to do something about it. What can I do? And the story goes on to say that the pastor took a pillow full of feathers and cut it open and opened a window on a windy day, and he dumped the feathers all out the window and let the wind just carry the feathers all over the place. And once they were all done and they'd been blown everywhere that they could possibly go, Brother Ken, he handed her the pillowcase back, and he said, "Go pick up all the feathers and put them back in the pillowcase." And she said, "Well, Pastor, that's impossible." And he said, "Exactly, that's what gossip is. Every time that we open our mouth and speak a word, that word's spoken. It can't be unspoken, Brother Larry. If we say something, it goes out. And it spreads like wildfire. Next thing you know, it's spread through the church. It's spread through the city. It's spread through the job. It's spread through the family. Words cannot be unspoken. Proverbs 26:22 says, "The words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost parts of the belly." In other words, once a word's spoken, the damage is already done, Sister Karen. Once it's said, whether it's truthful or not, it's already done its damage. It's already done harm. So, as I go on here, another thing that come to my mind, and while I was living in the world, this was a big thing for me. I looked at the church, Brother Bennett, and I said I would never come back to church for a lot of different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons was hypocrites in the church. And you can find them everywhere. And like I said, keep an open mind. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just trying to tell us that optics matter. When we're trying to reach the world, Brother Brandon, the optics of how we live, the optics of how the world perceives us matters. And I remember oftentimes that there was one instance, and I'm not tearing anybody down. I'm not talking bad about anybody, but I'm using this as an example. There was a time when I had, Sister Welch, made up my mind that I wanted to make things right, that I wanted to come back to God, Brother Taylor, and I wanted to start working on my relationship and those things. And I had went to this particular church, and it's not around here, but I went to this particular church, and I went 2 or 3 times. I believe it was 3 times. And the first 2 times that I went, Brother Welch, before I ever got in the car, I had made up my mind, Brother Brandon, that today was the day. I was gonna make things right. God had already been dealing with me. I was gonna do it. And I went to church, and I sat there, and I listened to all the songs, and I was just sitting there, and God was just tearing me up, right? I mean, he was convicting me. He was pulling at me. And, an altar call comes, and I much didn't really care for coming up to the front, especially in that time. And so I just knelt down at my chair, and I began to pray in my chair, and I began to really get a hold of God and let God begin to do some things. But both times that I did it, Brother Taylor, once the clock hand hit 12 o'clock, it got shut down. It was time to leave. They thanked everybody for coming to church. All those things while I'm back there sitting there trying to make things right with God, Brother Stacy, and it's just over. And I went to church. I went to that church 3 times, and I tried to make things right with God. And all 3 times that happened. And the 3rd time I sat in the chair, and you can ask my wife, the 3rd time I sat in the chair, when we got back in the car, I said, "I'll never go back." She wanted to know why. I said, "What's the point? What's the point in wanting to be a part of a church or be a part of something, Brother Bennett, that claims that we're wanting to reach the lost, that claims that we're wanting to help the sinners, that we're wanting to reap the harvest, but when somebody is in the pew trying to pray through, it doesn't matter?" And for me, that was a point of hypocrisy. That was a point of we preach that we want to reach the lost. We preach that we want to do all these things, but when you've got them in the altar, you do nothing with them. A hypocrite is one who pretends to be what he is not. An example would be Johnny complains when people talk about others behind their back, but he has no problem doing the same. Or writing a book about truth and honesty, but using made-up stories to make the point. A person who acts in contradiction to his or her stated beliefs or feelings. And I thought about this, and I thought, when I go to the workplace, Brother Welch, I've got people in my job, Brother Taylor, that know that I proclaim to be a Christian. They know that I try and live a separated life. But do my actions portray what I say? When they're sitting around the lunch table, Sister Karen, and they're talking dirty jokes, do I sit there and listen? Or do I separate myself? When there's gossip going around about the bosses or about somebody else, do I partake in that, or do I separate myself? Do I claim to be something that I'm not acting upon? And I had to think about this. I had to think about, you know what? If we're going to reach the world, if we're going to reap the harvest, Brother Stacy, that God's promised us in Miami, in Ottawa County, and all these other churches, if we're going to do that, it's going to take more than us just claiming to be something. The world is going to have to see, Brother Taylor, that we mean what we say, that God really is working through us, that God really is doing something. Anybody can say something. Anybody can fool anybody. But it's how we live and how we act and how we treat other people. You know, I mean, there's people here with all kinds of different backgrounds. I mean, we've got railroad, we've got trucking industries, we've got mobile phones, we've got car salesmen, we've got all kinds of people, sheriff's office. And like I said, it's in those moments when we're driving down the road, Brother Taylor, part of trucking industry, driving down the road and somebody cuts you off or somebody's watching you, how do we respond? Do we get angry? Do we get upset? Or do we just kind of take it and go? You know, Brother Bennett in the sheriff's office, I mean, no doubt you see all kinds of stuff. But when things get to you, do you blow up and explode and let your emotions go out of control, or do you try and reflect God's love? One thing that come to me is, somebody asked me one day, we were talking about this very thing, road rage or anger or whatever, and just exploding and just going off the rails and all of this stuff, and we began to talk, and I said, if God is love and God lives within us, Brother Stacy, then should we not be reflecting God's love out of us? The Bible says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. So if God lives and dwells in us and He's love, Brother Brandon, then everything that comes out of our mouth should be reflecting what's inside of our heart, which should be the love of God. And I believe in order to reach this world, that's what it's going to take. No matter what, Brother Larry, it's going to take showing people the genuine love of God. No matter the circumstance, no matter what the situation, no matter how they act or whatever, if we show love, that's how we're going to win them. 1 Peter 2:16 says, as free and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. The ESV version says it like this: live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. We must live a life that is